does any Ukrainian believe for 1 second that Vladimir Putin will live up to any agreement? Of course not. Nobody believes that Putin can be trusted. The only way that he would not fill into the whatever part that Ukrainian troops came out of would be if there were thousands of American, German, British, French soldiers sitting there. Otherwise, it will be a very short amount of time before you have either Russian troops or you have Rosguardia or some other unknown separatist quasi things that the Russians would try to say, well, that's not us. We didn't do that, just like they did back in 2014. So how anybody could trust that Russia would actually live up to some agreement like that, I think that would really be, you'd have to suspend belief to accept that. The idea of this, when I hear this phrase, Article 5 like, I mean, what does that mean? Article 5 means an armed attack on one shall be considered an armed attack on all. So if the United States is offering Article 5 like, that means if Russia attacked Ukraine again, then that would be as if Russia had attacked the United States. Do you really think, does anybody really think that this administration would actually do something about it? And what's an attack? Is it one Shahed drone, or does it have to be 500 Shahed drones, or Russian troops overrunning, another Ukrainian city? I mean, what constitutes an armed attack? So there is no such thing as Article 5 like. I mean, this administration does not even enforce the sanctions it has already put in place. India's oil import from Russia has gone up in October and then again in November, even though these latest tough sanctions were put in place. So I have zero confidence that the Trump administration would do anything to enforce this kind of agreement. Now, again, the burden and the risk is on Ukraine, not on old retired people like me on the outside watching. But as I look at what's happened over the last year, and indeed over the last several years, I would be very reluctant to agree to something with Russia if it depended on Russia living up to it in good faith or depending on the United States. This is where you would have to see a very strong European force that was there. Not one that's sitting in Poland, but a European force in Ukraine that has real capability, has real rules of engagement, and has the capability to shoot back immediately when Russia tests, as they inevitably will test immediately.
However, U.S. negotiators are trying to make the case that this Article 5-like guarantee is the most solid one U.S. has ever offered Ukraine, and they are trying to convince us this deal agreement would be reviewed and approved by U.S. Congress and would be legally binding. What is your take on that?
Well, I mean, the president has already said 2 or 3 times that, he would not protect some NATO countries if they weren't paying their 2%. Okay? That's Article 5. So why does anybody think Article 5 like would be even more that he would fulfill that obligation? I would just ask questions. Ask Secretary Rubio or Mr. Witkoff or Jared Kushner. So ask them to describe Article 5 like and give some examples. What would be the American response if Russia did this? So I'm sorry. And it is very, very difficult for me as an American who served in NATO for all of my 38 years. I was an Army officer, of course. America was in NATO. And I just don't have any confidence. I would love to be proven wrong, that they would be very strong and that they would punish Russia. But I don't hear or see anything that gives me confidence that this administration, even even though most of the Congress would support it and most Americans would support it, I don't believe this administration would do it.
They even hesitate to provide Ukraine with US air power commitment in case of such Article 5-like guarantee. They only have been discussing the idea of deploying European troops, but not on the battlefield, but on the west of Ukraine, like in my city, in Lviv or in Kyiv or in other parts which are not, do not have active clashes, fights going on.
Yeah. So, I mean, so this administration would go from withholding supplies, withholding intelligence, not enforcing sanctions, not offering to do air defense, to now Article 5 light. I mean, I would advise my Ukrainian friends to be very skeptical of that. To work closely with European allies. But also, obviously, Ukraine has to do everything it can to improve its own defenses, which means addressing the manpower situation in Ukraine as well.
From your perspective, can Ukraine sustain such pressure from US? They can just try to blackmail us to cut off intel sharing, to halt military aid going on to Ukraine?
Of course, that would be for the Ukrainian government to say, but I mean, what does the United States provide today that is so essential that can't be replaced? I mean, of course, I shouldn't know the amount of intelligence that's provided. That's not something that the public should be aware of. Maybe it's a lot. Maybe it's not. I don't know. Ammunition, equipment. I don't have visibility anymore on what's still going, but it seems to have been decreased somewhat. I'd love to be proven wrong on that as well. But if the U.S. said that's it, then what? I think that Ukraine could probably, and with working closely with European allies, could probably make up whatever gap is left behind. But again, because I don't know exactly what's still provided, I could not offer a useful analysis of that. But the Ukrainian government obviously knows.
Let's also cover current situation on the ground and the battle for Kupiansk. President Zelensky made the surprise visit to the city of Kupiansk, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says a Russian general who reported to President Putin on the capture of Kupiansk has since gone missing and no one knows where he is. Zelensky suggested this general may already be dead. Did he become another victim of this culture of lies in the Russia's military chain of command?
Well, of course, I don't know where the general is, but I've always thought that this was part of Russia's problem, this corruption inside the Russian military. I am one of the people who overestimated Russia's capability at the start of the war. I was surprised how poorly they did, and as I tried to understand why was I so wrong, part of it was because I failed to appreciate the depth of corruption, and that includes false reporting of status, of what you have, of your capabilities. And of course, in the Russian army, if you make a mistake or you fail a task, you're never going to be promoted. Well, that encourages false reporting or covering up mistakes and shortages and hope you never get caught. And so when you've got that, then you have people above you making bad decisions based on false information. So it wouldn't surprise me to learn that the general who reported that Kupiansk had been captured had either given a false report or had given, who knows exactly what he reported. The fact is, your president has the courage and the strategic sense to go there and say, hey, we're still here. So I think these are the kind of things that you cannot buy. This is the willpower of Ukrainian soldiers, of Ukrainian people, of Ukrainian president. The will is so much more important than any equipment, any missiles, any drones, any money. That's why throughout history, countries that were outnumbered defeated larger countries. You know, the United States, we failed in Vietnam, we failed in Afghanistan, the Soviets failed in Afghanistan, and they're failing now. The Russians are failing now, even though we're the bigger nuclear-powered country. It's because of the will of the country that is defending. And you know, I hear all the time that how many desertions there are from the Ukrainian army. I know that Ukraine armed forces have difficult times filling positions. You've got a lot of Ukrainian men and women who should be in the military but are not. They've either left Ukraine or they're doing something else. But when I think about my own country, the United States, during our revolution, which lasted for almost 8 years, at one point, George Washington had only a few thousand soldiers. They were not paid, they were not properly equipped. But as long as Washington was able to keep the army together, and they were suffered defeat after defeat after defeat to the British Army, he kept the army together. And then finally, they were victorious at the end. So it was keeping the army together, even though it was ripped with desertions and casualties and poor support. They stuck together, and that's what enabled the United States, America, to earn its independence. And so I am sure that what Ukrainian armed forces are going through now is terrible. Ukrainian people are suffering terribly. But understanding what's at stake and what happens if you don't succeed is why people from your president on down are still doing what they're doing. The Russians can't match that. The Russians don't have that. They only have a willingness to keep having their own people killed.
Meanwhile, Ukraine has launched its first strike on Russian tanker in the Mediterranean. And SBU source says drone hit the vessels in neutral waters more than 1,240 miles from Ukraine. Also, Ukrainian underwater drones have hit Russian Kilo-class submarine in Novorossiysk and successfully penetrated Russian naval defenses there. What does this say about the expanding reach of Ukraine's drone capabilities and special operations even in the Mediterranean?
Well, it says that no Russian is safe anywhere, that no matter how big 11 time zones Russia might be, that every corner can be reached by Ukrainian drone or Ukrainian special forces. And I think this is the kind of thing that is going to eventually make it impossible for Russia to keep financing the war. As Ukraine continues to hammer away at the oil and gas infrastructure, I really think this is the theory of victory for Ukraine, is to destroy Russia's ability to export oil and gas, which it needs to be able to do to pay for what it's doing. Destroying Russia's supply system, going after the rail networks. Ukrainians know this. And so the fact that Ukraine can reach out and start hitting ships in the Mediterranean or in the Caspian Sea or other places, not only does that damage Russia's oil and gas export industry, it also jacks up insurance prices. It makes companies less willing to take the risk. And so I think this is an important part of Ukraine's theory of victory.
Also, this recent attack on Russia's Kilo-class submarine in Novorossiysk forced Russia to sink several barges inside its port and they just blocked their own fleet from moving away from the port. Moreover, this night Russia didn't fire any kind of missile from using the submarines or naval fleet in the Black Sea. They had to use their naval capabilities in the Caspian Sea, so they just were firing missile from the Caspian Sea to Ukraine. This is really big, also successful achievement of Ukrainian drone capabilities to force Russian Novorossiysk naval base just to close down and block themselves.
Yeah, I was the first thing I thought of when I watched the video, like everybody else, of the submarine being hit, and you see diagrams of how it happened. You're like, how incompetent are the Russians that they would not understand the threat that Ukraine could pose, and that they could not protect the port. I mean, having nets and booms and things to protect port exactly from that kind of a attack. This is old stuff. So how incompetent are they that they could not do that, no matter how clever the Ukrainians are? I mean, this is the sort of thing that the Russians should have been able to stop. The fact that they couldn't tells me that, you know, either they are incompetent or their will. I mean, to do all the right things requires discipline, which requires will. And maybe, you know, on the other side, people are tired of that too. I would not want to be an officer in the Russian Navy right now.
Let's cover our final topic, the most final one. According to Politico, allies are embarrassed by U.S. role around the globe. Quote, U.S. is creating more problems than solving them. Also, there is a big military buildup near Venezuela. U.S. armed forces have seized several Venezuela's oil tankers. What is your assessment and reaction to this big buildup in Venezuela? How could this influence U.S. dominance around the globe, U.S. position in this world among other allies? And is this ground invasion of Venezuela is inevitable?
Nothing's inevitable, but it does have the feeling that the United States plans to take specific action or kinetic action against Venezuela, whether that's attacking air defense sites or command and control sites or various other parts of the infrastructure inside Venezuela. I don't know. The Congress doesn't know. The administration has not done what it's supposed to do by law to report to the Congress under the War Powers Act what it's doing, what it intends to do. So right now the administration is acting illegally in what it's doing against Venezuela. And, you know, it's very expensive to have the Navy out there doing what they're doing without us knowing what the mission is. This is not about drugs. That was the pretense. I think this is about oil, and it's also about Cuba somehow. I don't know this. I can only, as I look at what's happening and I think about Secretary Rubio as the son of Cuban refugees, in Florida being an important state in American politics, and you know, if you can, with a lot of Cubans and South Americans who now live in Florida as voters, I think these are all things that are connected. And it also is part of the Trump administration's national security strategy, which says basically the Western Hemisphere is ours and it's the priority. And so that's where you're seeing a lot of military power concentrated. But it fits within this very, I think, dangerous new strategic design where the U.S. has its sphere of influence, the Russians have theirs, and the Chinese have theirs. And this, of course, affects our allies. I mean, the Danes are obviously unhappy that the Trump administration talks openly about Greenland becoming a U.S. territory, and they even named Governor Landry of Louisiana as a special envoy to Greenland. I mean, this is kind of a bizarre thing. and talking openly about the Canadians as the 51st state. Canada, not only is it our biggest trading partner as a country, it also is our neighbor and it's a NATO ally. So this has caused, not only do countries no longer respect the United States, they don't understand what the hell's going on. And frankly, many Americans also don't understand what's going on.